It was the new millennium, and we got one of the most influential movies of all time, American Psycho. This sleek, sharp, and brutally funny portrayal of Wall Street insanity stars Christian Bale as Patrick Bateman. He was a pop culture icon. After all, how can a man who is completely obsessed with image and status not be an icon? This movie is extremely polarizing, yes, but that is the reason why it is unforgettable. More than 2 decades have gone by, and critics still debate over its meaning. Fans memorize the monologues from this movie, and cosplayers still dress up as Patrick Bateman. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Then 2 years go by and we get American Psycho 2, All American Girl. And this one is different. There is no Bale, no 1980s satire, or bloody and ironic Manhattan nightlife. Instead, you get Mila Kunis as this chirpy criminology student in what can best be described as a college campus slasher. There is no social commentary, there is no Wall Street, and there is certainly no Huey Lewis on the news. We just have a psych major whose biggest quirk is to kill her classmates to get ahead in life, with an awkward flashback tying her to Patrick Bateman. So you gotta wonder, what happened? How did we go from something absolutely jaw-dropping and gripping like American Psycho to something so dull and cliched like American Psycho 2? Well, that was the same question the world asked. The movie was so loosely connected with the original film that even its creator, Bret Easton Ellis, disowned it. This movie was marked as a continuation of Bateman's antics, even though it has nothing to do with him. This movie, in fact, had nothing to do with Bateman in the first place. What started out as an independent thriller got chopped up, rewritten, and rebranded into something that is completely unrecognizable. So today, we will be looking into how the corporate Frankenstein known as American Psycho 2, the sequel nobody asked for, came to be. The origins of American Psycho 2 actually began far away from the world of Patrick Bateman. If you look at the film industry at the same time, you will see that it was deep into the post-Scream era. See, teen horror was a big business at the time. Every studio wanted its own slasher franchise with hot young stars, ironic humor, and just enough blood that would make the people gasp. This is where The Girl Who Wouldn't Die enters the chat. Yes, that was the title before Lionsgate decided to butcher it completely. This movie was supposed to be a standalone psychological thriller in which this young girl named Rachel Newman, a criminology student with a dark and ambiguous past, would be the main character. The story follows her obsession with power, intelligence, and survival as she climbs to the top of her class using any means necessary. The story did not start out as a parody or a satirical piece. It did not comment on consumerism or the excess of the 1980s. It was a character-driven thriller. Think Cruel Intentions meeting Fatal Attraction, but on the college campus, in an alternate universe. The director, Morgan J. Freeman, no, not the actor, was brought to direct the film. Freeman is well known for his work on Hurricane Streets and Desert Blue, 2 films that explore alienation and youth culture, and he was well known for doing all of the work in those movies within a modest budget. When Freeman was signed on, he was thinking about ambition, psychology, and manipulation. He was not thinking about Wall Street or commentary on society. He wanted to focus on the atmosphere, the claustrophobic lecture halls, and the growing unease of realizing that we are following the villain in the chilly campus hallways. At least, that is what the early lecture notes suggested. Rachel Newman was a survivor. She was a girl who survived something absolutely horrible that completely changed the way she looked at life and shaped her. The script was reportedly supposed to build sympathy for her before twisting it and revealing how ambition and fear had completely changed her sense of morality. This is not a groundbreaking plot, but it was interesting. The script had potential. It could have been interesting. I mean, think about Urban Legend, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Teaching Mrs. Tingle. There was clearly an audience for youth-oriented suspense stories. So, if The Girl Who Wouldn't Die was marketed as such, it probably would have landed in that niche. It would have been mid-tier, but it would have been watchable. But then, things took a turn for the worse. During mid-production, Lionsgate realized that they had another property sitting in their catalog, American Psycho. This was the first film that caused controversy in the theaters, but it was killing it on home videos. Despite the movie coming out 2 years ago, It still had strong DVD sales, it had a passionate fan base, and Christian Bale got a lot of praise for his performance. So someone at Lionsgate looked at The Girl Who Wouldn't Die and decided that it might just sell better if you made it a sequel. You can almost imagine how the conversation went. A low-budget thriller? It would be hard to market, so it might just be a miss. But if it's a sequel to an already popular movie, you have nothing to worry about. You get the money and the audience in one swift go. And that is precisely what they did. With one swift motion, they rewrote the entire history. Suddenly, The Girl Who Wouldn't Die became American Psycho 2. But there was a problem. It had nothing to do with American Psycho, so the studio came up with the laziest solution to that problem. They filmed a new opening scene where Rachel Newman meets Patrick Bateman, not Christian Bale's Bateman. Michael Kemko's Bateman is wearing the mall kiosk suit. According to this new slapped-on prologue, Bateman killed the babysitter whom Rachel watched. But somehow, Rachel managed to stab him to death and ended up becoming the only survivor of the real American Psycho. That's it. That's the link between the two movies. And then Bateman just disappears into thin air. The team immediately jumps ahead with Rachel in college, where she is a criminology student and wants to become a teaching assistant for her professor, who is played by none other than William Shatner. When she realized that only one person would get that coveted spot, she immediately started trying to improve her odds by eliminating her competition. And as ridiculous and straightforward as it sounds, that's the movie. The transition from The Girl Who Wouldn't Die to American Psycho 2 is pronounced and not well done at all. The tonal mismatch is glaring and jarring. The flashback in the movie looks cheaper than the rest of the film, which is saying a lot. And the name drop of Patrick Bateman did not make any sense because Bateman's fate in the original movie was left ambiguous for a reason. Even Bret Easton Ellis, the man who actually created Bateman in the 1991 novel, denounced the sequel publicly because he had no interest, involvement, or idea about why the film existed in the first place. And Christian Bale? He refused to comment on it entirely. But Lionsgate could not care less. All they could see were dollar signs, and they started marketing American Psycho 2 All-American Girl with a glossy DVD cover featuring Kunis with a bloody knife and a promise of being angrier, deadlier, and sexier. Everything about this movie, including the marketing, was wrong. And Mila Kunis herself, who was 18 at the time when she shot the film, fresh off her that 70s show fame, was not happy about this movie either. She said that when she signed on, she had no idea that this movie would end up becoming an American Psycho sequel. In fact, from her interviews, it's pretty evident that Lionsgate came up with this idea when the shooting had wrapped up. Apparently, Mila Kunis even begged Lionsgate to change the title, but Lionsgate did not listen. If you ever watch the movie, you will see that she actually gave a solid performance as Rachel. She's bubbly, confident, and menacing. She plays the character with an unnerving sweetness and sociopathy that blend in seamlessly. However, because American Psycho as a label promises sharp social commentary and extreme violence, her performance felt very out of place. Then you have William Shatner as Professor Robert Shapiro. On the surface, Shatner being in a dark comedy horror film sounds perfect, but in the movie, the whole thing ended up being bizarre at best. Shatner brought his usual flair, but the script dropped the ball heavily, and he had barely anything to work with. He plays Rachel's professor to the fullest, where his lectures about serial killers have the gravitas of Captain Kirk's soliloquies about space exploration. His relationship with Rachel, which was supposed to be this creepy mentor-student dynamic, ended up becoming something tonally confused. Sometimes it feels like Shatner is making a parody of his own character, and other times he looks like he's way too serious about his role anyway. Despite all that, Shatner is one of the best parts of the film. You get this feeling that he knows exactly what kind of film he is in, and he's simply having fun with it all. And let's not even talk about the supporting cast. They all look like they stepped out of an early 2000s CW pilot. Everyone is fresh-faced and a little wooden. Their characters have no weight in the narration, except to be killed off by Rachel as she works her way up the ladder. Every character in the movie is a cliché. And the worst part of it all has to be how the film has no idea whether it wants us to root for Rachel or be afraid of her. The narration of the film clearly tries to be like Patrick Bateman's detached monologue, but it ends up becoming something that is extremely silly and turns her into a quirky anti-hero. She talks about murder like she's talking about life hacks. While Bateman gave us chilling introspection, Rachel gives us quirky survival of the fittest monologues. This movie is almost a dark comedy. It is nearly a thriller. The key word here is almost, because it isn't quite either of them. Tonally, it is something hollow that exists right in the middle. Cinematically too, the film makes no sense. It looks like a made-for-TV movie. The lighting is flat. The camera work is soulless. The editing cuts down the suspense instead of increasing it. There is no icy detachment in the film like there was in American Psycho. You can see that there is a tug of war happening behind every frame. The director wanted to make a suspenseful thriller, while the studio was trying to make a marketable sequel, and the actors were trying to navigate a script that did not know what it wanted to be. Nothing about this movie was working in its favor. Even the soundtrack feels mismatched. Instead of ironic pop tracks that undermined Bateman's obsession with material perfection, we get cliched early 2000s guitar riffs and moody instrumentals that could have been a part of any other teen drama ever. But amidst all of this chaos, there is no denying that this movie is watchable. It's one of those movies that you cannot look away from. You just have to know how it all ends in the end. There is a charm in its awkwardness, the cringy dialogue, the moments of unintentional comedy, and everything about it are absurd, but in a way that will make you laugh. That's probably why over the years fans have grown to appreciate the film. But when the film came out, no one was laughing. Even fans of Mila Kunis, who were hoping to see something of a charm in her role, were thrown off by how casually she was committing all the murders. But what makes American Psycho 2 fascinating, beyond everything, is what it represents. This is a turning point in how studios thought about intellectual properties. This is one of the earliest examples of rebranded sequels, where you take an unrelated script and attach it to an existing franchise just for money. This was a tactic that would later become common in the early 2000s, because the studios realized soon enough that it was cheaper to make something and then retrofit it to a name that everyone knew instead of creating something fresh. And because of this cheap tactic, American Psycho 2 lost everything that made the original movie so loved. There was no commentary about image, wealth, and the emptiness of consumer culture. Instead of getting existential horror in this movie, we just got dorm room drama. Lionsgate tried to connect two worlds, but ended up with something that was not satisfying to either. And this is only half the story, because when the film was released, the backlash was brutal and swift. But in a weird twist of fate, it was this backlash that ended up saving the American Psycho legacy from further damage. The movie came out quietly on home video in 2002, and it was something. There were no red carpet events, no interviews with the cast, no press junkets. Lionsgate silently shipped the DVDs, stuck Bale's name on it, and then waited to see if the curiosity of the crowd would do the rest. For casual fans wandering through the store, the title alone was enough to spark a little intrigue. The first movie had gone from a controversial art house movie to somewhat of a cult phenomenon. By 2002, Bateman was synonymous with a slick, narcissistic villain, so naturally, people expected more of that when they saw the movie. Instead, they got a glossy, awkward campus slasher that felt weird. Critics did not just dislike the second movie, they almost nuked it from existence. Rotten Tomatoes still lists it with a single-digit approval rating. The most common criticism of this film was who it was for and what it was trying to be. It wasn't scary enough to be a horror, it wasn't witty enough to be a satire, and it was way too self-serious to be absurd. Everything about the movie was tame, and the connection with American Psycho was so paper-thin that most reviewers figured that the studio slapped the title on after the film was done, which is exactly what the studios did. Shatner got some praise for hamming it up as Professor Shapiro, but even he couldn't save the tone. It was a made-for-TV movie and not a theatrical sequel to the cult masterpiece it was marketed as. As for Mila Kunis, She was barely 19 and had just gotten her first lead role in a feature film. The studio clearly saw star potential and leaned into it. But later down the line, Kunis admitted that she had no idea that the studio was going to brand the movie with American Psycho and turn it into a barely connected sequel. In a 2016 interview, Kunis stated that she was tricked into this movie, and honestly, I don't blame her for feeling that way at all. Critics completely massacred this movie, and the audiences were not any kinder. Fans of the original American Psycho felt duped, and the backlash that followed was brutal. But in the middle of all those haters, there were some viewers who found this movie oddly charming. It was like this movie was daring the audience not to laugh, and those fans categorized it with movies like Showgirls and The Room. You know, the so bad it's good subcategory of films. But you gotta wonder, how does a passion project turn into something this goofy? If you were to look into why this film failed, you would realize that it happened because of four main things: the misguided marketing, the tonal confusion, the creative interface, and the complete and utter misunderstanding of the original film's appeal. So let's look into the marketing. When Lionsgate decided to rebrand the movie, they were thinking like marketers and storytellers. The logic in their head was simple. People would recognize the American Psycho brand and buy it. However, what they failed to recognize was that brand recognition only works when there is a thematic continuation. The people they were targeting were there for the satire, style, and psychological depth, which the sequel had none of. Then you have the tonal confusion. The original movie was a balance of horror and satire with an edge. The sequel didn't even know what it wanted to say. It was either being melodramatic or flirting with black comedy without any consistent tone. Every scene of the movie looked like it belonged somewhere else. The creative interface was also a crucial part, because the director wanted a tight, dark thriller centered on ambition and sociopathy in academia. However, when the studio wanted to connect it with American Psycho within the flashback and exposition, the film completely lost its own identity. And this is where the misunderstanding of the original movie comes into play. American Psycho was never about murder, it was about the image. Bateman could not distinguish between genuine emotion and surface-level performance. It was a movie about emptiness cosplaying as luxury. The sequel had none of it. It was all about a melodramatic slasher movie, which missed the point completely. So, when you combine all of these factors together, you get something that is simply hollow. But time is a strange thing. By the time the mid-2010s rolled around, American Psycho 2 started gaining traction online. YouTubers laughed at its tonal whiplash and bizarre dialogue, and suddenly, it was a part of this weird cinematic niche. While this is not precisely a redemption, it is definitely something. However, the most intriguing part of it has to be the movie that never was. I'm sure you too have wondered what The Girl Who Wouldn't Die would have been like if the studio had left it alone and let it be what it needed to be. In that version, Rachel survived a serial killer attack as a child and ended up obsessed with criminal psychology. She ended up working with Professor Shapiro, who was said to have unethical ties to the FBI. The tension starts to build, and we end up with a twist, where Rachel is forced to identify if she ever moved on from the childhood trauma or if she has become the very thing she was scared of the most. If that movie had come out, while it may not have been a bestseller, it would have earned a respectable audience for being an enjoyable thriller. But instead, thanks to Lionsgate, this movie will always be remembered for the one thing it was not. Today, almost 2 decades after the movie came out, this movie sits in a weird cultural limbo. It is too forgotten to be famous, but it is too infamous to disappear. It's a punchline, but it is also a reminder of the transitional period in Hollywood when physical media was so profitable that studios cared about that number. So, in that sense, this movie actually tells us a lot about the history of popular cinema. Marvelous verdict. So, what can we actually take away from this strange, ill-fated sequel? American Psycho 2 is bad, yes, but it is also instructive, as it shows us how fragile a film's identity can be. How easily can the meaning of a film be erased with one simple corporate-focused decision? But maybe that is why this movie, which is the cinematic equivalent of a rumor that got repeated too many times, is still talked about. Under all of the hated aspects of the movie, ambition, confusion, and desperation lie in making something work even though everyone involved in the project knows that it won't. If you get rid of all of the American Psycho branding, you will see that under all of that, there is a modest and slightly clumsy film about ambition, obsession, and what the cost of both is. Ironically, that's not too different from the core message of the original film, albeit that was far less messy. So, could this movie have been good? Yes. I think it would have found its target audience as a dark, female-driven thriller. It would have gotten its own small cult following all by itself. But instead, it became a cautionary tale about how people should not force sequels where none belong. With that, we come to the end of this video. Let us know what you guys think about this movie in the comments down below, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!